Welcome to the Human Momentum Podcast. I'm your host, Erik Schabert. I created this podcast to leverage 12 years of osteopathic medical training and over a decade of experience in primary care medicine to help sort through the confusing and often contradictory health information found on the internet. I want to distill all this information down into a form that you can use every day to optimize your health as you move forward through life. So if you are looking to get to life's finish line with the ability to do all the things that you love intact, then this podcast is for you. If this is your first time here, please don't forget to smash the subscribe button and throw us a like as well. I'd also love it if you would share this episode with people in your life who you believe can benefit from it. It really helps us get this information out to more people. With all that said, let's move on with today's episode. Welcome to today's edition of the Human Momentum Podcast. Just yesterday, the Trump administration issued a statement about an executive order they are planning to implement, rescheduling cannabis products from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 at the federal level. Now, cannabis products have, for quite some time now, been showing up as legalized either for medical or recreational use at the state level. However, federally, they have still been entirely prohibited. This rescheduling going from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 means that from a federal law perspective, cannabis products like marijuana will no longer be considered in the same category as, say, heroin or PCP, and now will be treated much more similarly to a compound like Xanax. This does seriously improve access and the ability to do research on cannabis products, removing a lot of barriers there. This is kind of a mixed situation, though. I get a lot of questions on whether this rescheduling is a good thing or a bad thing. I'm going to foreshadow a little bit of the end of this video and say that I think on balance, it is probably more positive than negative, but there are some real negatives to this rescheduling. And we've seen a lot of those negative effects playing out in some of the states where particularly recreational use has been authorized. I'd also like to go into a little bit of the available research that we have on cannabis. There has been some good research done, but I think a lot of additional research needs to be done before we definitively know what cannabis products are effective for as far as medical treatment and where they are ineffective and exactly what the adverse risk profile of regular cannabis use is. There was a study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association online at the end of November that was a meta-analysis or a pooled data analysis of the available research on cannabis products. I want to go into that one a little bit. I haven't had a chance to deep dive into every individual study that was included in this published article, but I have been able to look at enough of them that I think I have a good gist of what this article is saying. First off, it acknowledges that there really are only a handful of conditions for which cannabis has shown proven benefit through randomized control trials. And that would be weight loss associated with AIDS, nausea and vomiting associated with chemotherapy, certain treatment-resistant pediatric seizure disorders, treatment-resistant neuropathic pain, as well as spastic muscle pain associated with multiple sclerosis. Otherwise, we really don't have a lot of proof of efficacy with cannabis products. And that is a little problematic considering that the majority of recommendations for disease treatment with cannabis are for conditions that don't fall into those categories, namely chronic non-malignant pain, that is chronic musculoskeletal pain that is not associated with malignant conditions like cancer, anxiety, and insomnia. And when we look at the research that has been done on these conditions, it is largely observational research. And in part, that's because of the limitations in doing good quality randomized control trials on Schedule 1 drugs. It has to be done only through federal funding and only at very specific centers. The observational studies can then largely be done in states where there is state legalization, and they can collect data from databases and generate observational studies based on those data without running afoul of federal law. But those types of studies really don't give us information on causative efficacy and whether or not a specific therapy is truly effective in those settings. And it gives us some associative data on safety. But again, we don't even know for certain if these cannabis products are causing some of the adverse events we see. And we do see adverse events with cannabis. There is obviously a lot of hype about the potential for efficacy for a number of conditions with cannabis. But so far, the data doesn't really live up to that hype. And the idea that because this is a natural product, it is completely safe has also not panned out. Although I think it's fair to compare the safety profile of cannabis to some of the medications that it is competing against and say that it compares similarly, and in some cases, even favorably. The data from this meta-analysis that was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association has been used by some people in media who obviously have a bias against the legalization of cannabis to say that it has no medical efficacy for a lot of the things it's being prescribed for. And while this meta-analysis definitely states that there isn't good evidence for that yet, also, if you dive into the individual studies, it becomes apparent quite quickly that there's just a lot of contradictory evidence that you can't draw conclusions from. And a lot of it is being pulled from observational studies that it is also difficult to really draw definitive conclusions from. I would say it's more accurate to say that we need additional evidence gathered through randomized control trials, and especially some larger trials. Because even a lot of the RCTs I looked at, there were 20, 30 people enrolled. We need thousands to really get the kind of data where we can make definitive conclusions. I should also note that I was still in primary care practice in Florida when cannabis products were legalized for medical use. And I did have patients who went to some of the practitioners in the area who evaluated people for appropriate medicinal recommendations and made recommendations for medicinal use. My experience with cannabis products was that from a side effect profile, from an adverse effect profile, the types of products my patients were using, which were largely edible products, not inhaled products, and they were largely what I would classify as moderate to low dose THC products, not some of the higher dose products that you do see on the market. For these products in the individuals that I was treating, I did not see really serious adverse effects. The adverse effects we worry about with cannabis products, first off, is psychosis. There is definitely an elevated risk of either worsening a propensity for psychosis that's already there, or maybe even inducing psychosis in some individuals. We don't have enough data to definitively classify this risk, although every source that I looked at said that this risk was still relatively small, but it's significant. And the risk is definitely dose dependent. So individuals that are using cannabis products daily, and particularly those using high dose and inhaled products that can have a large variety in dosage, where it is difficult to control the dose, these are the individuals that seem to be at the most risk. It also should be noted that smoking cannabis does elevate the risk of heart attacks and strokes over time and does accelerate atherosclerosis, similarly to what we see in tobacco, but not quite to the same extent. But it is still a statistically significant elevation in risk. We also see with daily usage, particularly in younger individuals, it is common to have cognitive impairment. We see an increased risk of auto accidents, falls, and other types of accidents. In the elderly, it definitely increases fall risk. And additionally, in young people, we can see increased rates of depression, and we can see blunted motivation. Now, despite that, I would say that when you're talking about an individual who is perhaps using Xanax for sleep or anxiety and is using that medication regularly and is looking to transition over to a cannabis product as an alternative therapy, I think you can make a strong argument that the potential for long-term adverse effects is actually less with cannabis than it is with an intervention like alprazolam or Xanax. I also think because of the severe risk for dependence and addictive behaviors, that for chronic non-malignant pain, if cannabis is effective for an individual, it definitely is a better alternative than using opiate therapies. So these are the kind of things I think we need to keep in mind as cannabis becomes more available in local areas. And I definitely am going to be following the research closely because this is something that is in the realm of medicine that I tended to involve myself in when I was in practice. I would not recommend somebody pursue cannabis for chronic non-malignant pain, anxiety, or insomnia when they have never used it previously. If they've had experiences with it in the past, and those experiences have largely been positive, I think it is reasonable to try, particularly if you're looking at eliminating things such as benzodiazepines like Xanax or opiates like Vicodin or Percocet as alternatives, because I think the potential for long-term problems actually goes down with cannabis relative to those products. Otherwise, though, I don't think we have enough evidence to really push forward with recommending cannabis products on a broad scale to a large number of individuals for medical issues, other than the ones I discussed at the very beginning of this video. I hope this is something that's been informative and helpful for you all. And please do remember that these videos are intended for informational purposes only. They do not constitute medical advice and in no way confer a doctor-patient relationship with any of you who have been kind enough to check it out. Please do use these as a basis to get into a good informed discussion with a physician in your area and get the help you need. If you have further questions, feel free to fire away in the comments and I will be happy to answer. And please do remember to like and subscribe if you found this helpful. It really does help me continue to do this and get more information out to more people. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.